Not to lay beyond, but
Wait, it's like,
I dropped it on the parking lot, sorry.
maybe, you're not really own it, then they sell it.
I miss those Christmas parties, Matt.
Boy, you
So,
do.
Huh?
Boy,
Looks
you
more of
do.
an investment in a car.
more expensive.
We threw better
It-
parties
it
than we were
holds
lawyers.
value like that.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they do.
It should.
They use
You never got to experience those parties.
Okay, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I'll call this meeting to order. Thank you all for being here today. We're gonna get right into it. I recognize former Mayor Bucky Johnson, who's here with us today. And I want to thank everybody for being here. Let's start with the roll call. Let the record show that all are accounted for except for Councilmember Arlene Beckles, who is out ill. I thought she was gonna remote in, but sometimes when you're not feeling well, you're just simply not feeling well. So we'll attribute it to that. We'll start off with citizen input. If there's any citizens here that want to come and address the council, you certainly may. Come to the podium and give your name and address.
Pat Ike, 6226 Gaines Street here in Norcross. I heard Andrew talking earlier to Eric, and since it's gonna be a short meeting, I figured I'd take my 30 minutes now. But seriously, very short. One of the items obviously on there tonight is the first discussion this year about annexation, which was always so close to my heart. And I wanna thank Mayor and Council for doing it early in the year and not having some kind of rush later on, and staff and everyone else for getting all the information, because I know how difficult that can be. I'm not taking any position on either option or anything tonight. All I'm asking is, one thing I'd asked last year, and I think I mentioned this several times on council, just total transparency and getting the word out and getting word back from the citizens. I mean, I understand public hearings, that's the only time you can get them in there, and a lot of people just don't go to public hearings. I think you all agree with that. We've got a lot of opportunities, I think, with the newsletter, with the online newsletter as well, the civic ready notifications, the Jones Street Manual Bulletin Board. I mean, it's the magnitude of such a big decision to make here, and we just need to have as much input as possible. And I'm just stressing that today. That's all I got.
Thanks so much. We certainly appreciate that. Anyone else at this time?
Clark Johnson, 635 Sunset Drive. To echo some of what Pat is saying, you've heard my spiel about annexation. I don't, not in favor of either of the options yet, but certainly would like some more information and input from us. I appreciate Andrew meeting with the citizens on Saturday morning and discussing some of that, and there were a lot of questions. I think one of the main questions was whether or not the citizens, I know generally speaking the current citizens do not vote on that, but I know that there was a consideration last time you were looking to do this, that was gonna be an option. You know, if that is an option, we'd love to see that happen, but we certainly need a lot more information in this area, and because I mean it is a huge decision and it's pretty much a permanent decision, so we want to go about it very thoughtfully. So appreciate your thoughtful consideration, and don't necessarily want to keep kicking it down the road. If it's not viable, don't even put it on the agenda, just take it off. You know, don't vote just to vote on this. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much. Anyone else at this time? Okay, let's move to board updates. Do we have any board updates? No board updates, then general updates? Council general discussion. Just want to, from my vantage point, had an opportunity to go down to Atlanta to Colony Square, where they have reimagined that complete area down there and invested $155 million into that Colony Square area. It was fantastic. It's walkable. They put in green space. There are a couple of new high-rise buildings that are in and around that center. It was it was good to see and know and understand that even though you have something already built up and the infill's already done, it's okay to go in and pull that infill out and reimagine it, and they did. It's really nice. Enough for me to want to go back down and maybe have dinner or something, or kind of walk the shops. It was a really nice experience. So if you have an opportunity to go down, certainly do that.
I was down there 2 weeks ago and had dinner.
Did you?
It was great, yeah.
Yeah.
Went to the museum, then walked down to College Square.
Hey.
Were all our restaurants closed or
You didn't have a concert going at the time. They did.
But it was really cool. I like what they did down there. It was very, very thoughtful. Board appointments. We will discuss those in exec. Discovery Garden Park, Parks and Green Space, Trails and Commission. All right, let's move down to item G, City Manager's Report.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to be fast. First of all, we had a very successful, I think, Georgia Cities event with our elementary school kids, and want to thank all the various departments. We've got John is here, who is heavily involved in that, and other departments, and the fire department, and even some of the people from Discovery Gardens came out and talked to the kids about growing things. I think we had over 700 kids, and at the end of the event, I had the opportunity to take the bucket truck up and take a look at our roof, which we're going to be talking about in a little bit. We're going to be putting a new roof on this building, and after what I saw, I'm happy to know that we're bringing that to you tonight. I just respond to something that came up, I think, Saturday concerning code enforcement at the Crown Plaza, and I spent some time this morning with the general manager and actually one of the Patel brothers that are the owners there, and clarified something that I talked to our police chief with, that the hotel ordinance is not being enforced out there. There was some concern earlier on, but in terms of backing into parking spaces or needing to get a placard to put on your front of your car, I think it's clear to our staff that those don't apply to that hotel based on the unique circumstances there of having both a restaurant and the meeting space. Meeting space is really coming along well, and they did get the movable doors so that they can partition off the larger of those rooms. So probably within a few weeks they'll have those up, and they had a massive event over the weekend, a 2-day event using the larger room. But as they have the opportunity to put those dividers up, they'll be able to partition it and have several small groups meeting simultaneously. The audit is done. I mentioned that to you once before. We'll be bringing in the auditors to do a formal presentation. I want to thank Paul for getting them to the finish line. There are some findings that related to, in one case, how long it took to handle all the adjustments at the end of the year. So that's obviously something we'll be looking at addressing as we get closer to the end of this current year. The ending fund balance in the general fund was $10.95 million, which was up $2.6 million. That was overwhelmingly accounted for by the CARES Act money that we received through Gwinnett County last year. As you may recall, we intended to move $1 million of it over to our capital project fund. In August, you approved that, but the money never got moved. So that's part of why that ending fund balance was as high as it was, and we'll be moving that this fiscal year. Can't explain why it didn't get moved last year. But Paul's going to be talking about tonight about where we are with the various SPLOST funds as well as the 2017 bond funds. You might recall we borrowed $8 million in bond funds back in 2017, and I think a couple million are still to be spent. So we may have kind of over-expected how quickly the money would go out the door for the library and some of the other big projects. But I think that's going to help you have a better context as you talk about various projects, to understand where we have an opportunity to spend our current SPLOST, prior SPLOSTs, as we talk about the upcoming SPLOST that hopefully will be approved later this year and take effect next year.
Arlene is trying to get in on a Zoom.
I just saw that.
Okay. Sorry.
Well, and that reminds me, I meant to mention that both Mayor Pro Tem Myers and Councilwoman Dr. Beckles participated in that Georgia Cities event, so thank you to the two of you for helping out with that event. The other thing I just mentioned is in our 3 enterprises, give you a sense of how we ended up last year. And the auditor will do this, but since you've waited a very long time, I figured that I'll cheat-
Recording in progress.
I'll cheat a little bit and let you know how we ended up. The electric utility ended up $955,000 to the good. So our net position increased from 26.1 million to 27.1 million. That was despite the fact that we were putting all those meters in last year. So as we talk about finding the money to look for opportunities to improve our system and our infrastructure, reduce power outages, I think we're positioned well for that.
Does that include the non-discretionary as well as the discretionary?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so like the
27
total-
is everything.
Okay.
Good question, thank you. The stormwater utility had an operating income of 458,000, so the net position at the end of last year was a little over 3 million. And we're gonna plan to spend some of that down because we have our pipeline relining project underway, and you'll be getting notices from time to time of where they're on another road dealing with that. But we're trying to spend down both a good portion of last summer's ARPA funding as well as a portion of the cash that we've accumulated to try to jumpstart getting our stormwater infrastructure improved. And then finally, for an item that we're gonna talk about tonight, our solid waste enterprise fund lost $108,000 last year, but still carried forward $923,000. So we're gonna talk about a solid waste contract tonight, and I thought it important for you to have a sense that we do have some money available, and should you consider doing a slower increase in rates by spending down some of what we've accumulated, you have that opportunity if you so choose. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that most comprehensive report. We will go ahead and move on down to item H, which is items for discussion. Start with number 1. Camille, I think that was yours, position reclassification for receptionist administrative coordinator.
Mayor and Council, my recommendation is to approve a reclassification of an existing position of receptionist admin coordinator to administrative coordinator 2 in Public Works Department. The background on that is that receptionist admin coordinator position job title has changed, and several duties has been attached to that, to the new position from the capital projects, former capital projects position. And those duties include the responsibilities of purchase orders, accounts payable, invoices, and request of ticket tracker responses, and work orders. Any questions?
Thank you. Now, who was the former capital projects manager?
That would be Melissa's, but now she's capital projects manager.
Okay.
So some of her duties is assigned to the admin coordinator position.
Oh, I got it.
Trying to have,
Monique, can you turn the camera on? Dr. Beckles just sent me a message.
Maybe a better angle.
Come on now.
we'll hold our breath.
She said she can hear, but she can't see.
Still?
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure she can see.
Dr. Beckles, can you see now? She can hear, she can see, but she can't talk. Okay.
There are speakers in here. Sorry,
I-
Camille.
That's fine.
Yeah. Monique, would you contact her via text and work those details out? We certainly appreciate that. Okay, thank you, Camille. I don't have any, Council, you have any other questions?
Well, I have a question, not necessarily for Camille, I think it's for this body. Why are we doing this? This is clearly just administrative change within the city manager's department. I'm trying to understand why this is coming to council. This is the third time now we've dealt with this in the last 3 or 4 months. I'm wondering why we're getting into the weeds with things like this. This should be an administrative decision that the city manager takes.
When
care
there's
of.
creation of new, new departments, those do have to come in through council and for approval.
This is not a new
Or
department.
when they're creating new positions, those do come to the council.
Well, this is a reclassification. This is not an additional employee. This is not a new department or a new
Some of
job.
this- yeah.
It's a reclass.
Yeah, some of it's
So,
left
I'm
up for
asking why we need-
interpretation.
Hmm?
Some of it could be left for interpretation. We could consider that it's not a reclassification, it's the creation of a new department. I think staff just simply presents it to us to make sure that we have no questions, and then we move on. If we have questions, we may have questions concerning the change.
I guess I'll ask a question here.
Yes?
Does this body believe that we should be approving reclassifications? If not, we should probably, if we have consensus that we don't need to approve reclassifications, we should approve positions. We should vote such that we
Right.
don't approve reclassifications. It just seems,
A new position makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah.
A reclass doesn't make much sense.
Yeah.
If you're adding an employee, you're adding a department, or you're adding a position that never existed before.
We're not budgeted for.
We're not budgeted for that, et cetera, then, yeah. But this seems like we're getting into the weeds here.
Right, if it's simply a reclassification, I can see why, I can see where that would apply.
Okay.
I mean, it seems like we've gotten into a mode of reclassifications coming before us, and I'd like to suggest that if it's just a simple reclassification, the city manager is more than capable of handling that. And I don't think that needs to come to this body for approval. The other reasons, yep, sure. I mean, clearly, there's other things where that would be required, but if it's a simple reclass, can we just have a consensus on that, or, and let him, in the future, if it's a reclass, take care of that
If it's a
also?
reclassification, and I guess the question is whether or not it is a reclassification based on what the charter says.
Yeah, if it's a reclassification based on what the charter says, then I think we just let that go through. We gotta let
Right.
that through the process.
Right.
So like this one seems to be right in line with that. Is there any budgetary requests, financial impact?
Well, there's a financial impact anytime you change a position.
Well, unbudgeted financial impact.
But given that this is really, what we're doing, this department is in part driven by Mary Beth's departure. So we brought the position, her position, you took down last month or the month before last month, to a department director rather than a dual department director and assistant city manager. We bumped Melissa Ziegler's position because part of what we've been asked to do is to focus on creating a more formal capital program, and she's gonna be taking that on. And part of doing that, it's important that some of the more administrative functions that she's performed continue to be handled. So we're, in this case, bumping up the requirements for what was the receptionist position to be able to handle that. But I think there's still a net of those three changes in terms of savings to the city.
Okay. Well, I feel that we don't have to bring all these to a discussion.
I think,
Or
but
just for
based on-
reclassification, but
Right.
that would be
Right.
my position.
If I could make a suggestion, what might help you is if we have an intent to do one, and we send that to you, I send it to the six of you and allow you to know what the proposal is, and if you have a concern, I think we can all read the charter and come to different conclusions. Unfortunately, it's not the clearest language that I've seen, but if there were a concern, then we would bring that to you and formally go through this process, so you have that opportunity to ask questions.
I think that's fair.
And you can ask questions outside, but, you
Yeah.
know, I'm not trying to slip anything by you. I don't have any concern about letting you know when we're proposing to reclassify. But to me, I think an organization is a reflection of some formal structure, but also the people that we have, their capabilities, and so, it's a good example. Mary Beth is leaving, there's no one that can take Mary Beth's position in terms of the role that she's been performing the last 6 years or so. So we reshuffle responsibilities based on people and their capabilities. But if you're comfortable with that,
I'd be comfortable with
the
that.
next time we do one of these, we'll send you the information, give you the opportunity to let me know if you want to bring it through a more formal process.
I believe
Makes sense
so.
to me.
Okay, thank you so much, Camille, we
Thank you, Camille.
appreciate
Mayor,
that.
can I make a suggestion that we take item 3 next, since item 2 might take more discussion, and John has had a long day already, I suspect.
Yeah. Come on up, John, City Hall roof
I'm
contract
thinking the roof is a
agreement.
little bit less, requires less discussion.
Just one second, can we verify Arlene can hear us and speak?
She can hear it, she can see it.
Can you hear us, Dr. Beckles?
She's muted.
Yes, I can hear, thank you.
Okay, just wanna make sure.
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
We're here to, we had some contractors come in, they put bids in for the replacement of the roof. We had like 23 of them that came through, and out of those 23, only 4 submitted bids. And, we wanna move, seeking a recommendation of approval to move forward with the CGS contractors. And we kind of looked at their reference, they did a lot of the schools, Gwinnett County, Cobb County, City of Atlanta, they did work for City of Decatur schools as well. So they had a good reference, and then also, their price was a little lower simply because they had ordered some supplies. And with the supplies they ordered, it was on back order, so they ordered from a different company, so they ended up with all the supplies, so they gave us a good break because they have supplies and stuff for the TPO group. So, staff is recommending approval of contract to move forward with CGS.
And significantly under budget too, thank you.
Yes, yes, sir.
Good job.
Yep.
Quick, how much was that contract?
785.
And I think we planned
And the
over
others were all
100,000.
We
over
had 161.
Everything else was over 100.
Wow.
And are they peeling up our existing roof, or they're going down on top?
They're doing the entire roof, they're gonna do the siding as well, the aluminum siding, they're gonna reseal all of that as well, so we should have a flawless roof. And they're gonna redo the drains on the roof as well.
Flawless, isn't it?
No. Well, yeah,
Does it come with a warranty?
it does, yes, sir, 10-year warranty.
10 years?
Yes.
Wow. Good job.
Good, thank you.
Some of us were worried when they were all up on the roof, because we could hear them walking around.
We had a lot of contractors, and some of them came in twos, you know, they had somebody with them, so. Not all of that, just 4 people.
How old is the present roof?
The building is 01, so we've been putting Band-Aids on for.
So it's
the last
20
few
plus years old?
Yes.
Is that the typical life that you'd expect from
10 years, usually the max life on the roof.
10?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So we've doubled,
We did good on our roof.
okay.
Oh, without leaks and stuff.
Yeah, we had-
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's debatable whether we do well or
We did a lot of recoating, things like
Right.
that, but not actually replacing the entire roof.
Yeah,
Um,
Really cheap.
and it's a white roof?
It is now, yeah.
It will be?
Oh, you will be, yes.
Okay.
We protect the sun, the heat, so.
Yeah.
2 questions I have. I guess for me, if we think it's about every 10 years, do we allocate funds for this, for the next 10 years that it's already a budget item, or do you wait till you?
That's a good question. I mean, you can, with fleet, a lot of times you'll set up a fleet replacement program so that you replace when you need to. We could. The other thing is, maybe we just start planning that 10 years from now, we expect to replace the roof, and if we're lucky, the next, this one lasts longer. One thing I'll say is with a flat roof and a membrane, there was part of me that thought we should be trying to put solar panels up as a demonstration project, but with a flat roof and membrane, that just risks spending money only to have a leaky roof. So I think if we want to do a demonstration project with solar panels someplace in the city as part of a smart cities initiative, do it someplace other than this roof.
Gotcha. And then the last question I have is, I'm assuming you've got all the preparation for dates and times and what impact we'll have to citizens that need to come to this here. Will there be parking issues, or
Yeah,
just
yes.
make sure we don't interrupt our services?
we're gonna put all that in place once we get approved and so on. That'll be part of, once we get a start date from them. We have an initial start date, but just to get with them, get everything organized. We're gonna try to do it when, not we can do it in the evenings or not. So, we'll make sure that, staff is not impacting on customers that's coming in.
Yeah, I can think of some of our events like 4th of July and some other events where
Yeah.
parking over here.
Okay, yeah, it won't happen on those events.
Right, okay, I just wanna make sure we're just aware of, our citizens, they do
Right.
park here, it's public
Yes.
parking.
Yeah, they won't be working during those days.
Okay.
So,
How long would you expect it to take?
I wanna say 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Yeah, about 2 weeks it should be out of here.
Not too bad.
It might not take that long, but we predicting, because once they get it, they start tearing stuff out, and all the coding, the sealing, so on.
Okay, if there are any other questions? Thank you, John, you've done a great job with this.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate your hard work. Okay, let's then move to number 2, sanitation contract amendment.
Mary Beth is with her grandson tonight, so I'll do this one. So we'd asked you last month to decide between going out for RFP or to extend our existing contractual relationship with Waste Management for 1 year. And you decided last month to go, and it was my recommendation to do a 1-year extension, and we knew that the price was going to be significant. What we try to lay out is that what Waste Management charges us is not necessarily what we'll charge the customers. So during the budget process, we're going to need to have a pretty frank discussion about how to allocate the cost. With the information you received, you saw that they're not increasing the cost at all for roll-off service. They're increasing their charge to us by more than 20% for the front-end loader, and how much you pay depends on how big a dumpster you have and how many times a week they empty it. But the largest increase is for residential customers. That's a more labor-intensive process. And we also learned that part of what was driving the cost is the yard waste, because the cost to dispose of that has gone up significantly. So the subcontractor that Waste Management uses with us to handle that increased their charge. In the last year, we did have an increase last September, but that increase reflected the fact that under our existing contract, they were limited to a component of the CPI that ties to these types of utility services. So the representation from Waste Management was they couldn't pass on some of their costs last year, and that's why we see this big jump. Haven't been a lot of contracts in the last year that have been awarded. The one that we're aware of, Alpharetta, was fairly consistent with this in terms of the $25 to $26 a month for residential pickup. In Alpharetta, there's an additional $4 for glass pickup, so theirs is up to about $29 a month. But again, you've got the opportunity, if you approve this, this is what we'll pay, the basis for what we'll pay Waste Management, but we have to have that discussion of what you want to charge our customers. And the reason I wanted to tell you the results of the audit, since the auditor wasn't in the room and I can't get in trouble with him, was so that you have some context that you do have the ability to buy down some of this, but just realize that we can't sustain that. But if you wanted to smooth an increase over a couple of years, you have that ability to do some of that. And in fact, that's what happened this year, because we've been paying $15.73 a month to Waste Management since last September 1st for every residential customer, but we've been collecting $15.05 from the residential customers that pay for their service. So I'll take a breath and stop talking.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions relative to this agreement?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I've got a couple of questions. Seeing as it's a very large increase, I'd like to explore ways that we can our pricing aside, our cost side, how can we help mitigate this? It seems to me one of the areas of opportunity may be to contract ourselves, rather than going through Waste Management for things like the leaf pickup and stick pickup during the course of the year. I know right now it's part of their agreement with us. Can we back that out of the agreement and then look to see about contracting directly with that supplier and potentially maybe, going to a competitive bid on that so that we make sure that we're getting the best deal on that. I don't want to reduce services. That's the last thing I want to do. But I'd like to make sure that we're exploring any way possible to reduce the cost of the services. Just on the surface of it, when we pay another company to contract on our behalf, we're paying a premium for that. So one would think we would at least be able to avoid the premium. And that would be something. I also noticed another item in here that you suggested the possibility, I know you're not recommending that, but you suggested the possibility of not doing the large appliance or large item pickup, and that would save each resident $3 a year, which honestly, the value that comes with that, I think is worth way more than $3. And $3 most people wouldn't even notice. So I would suggest that might, from my perspective, that might not be the best place to find the savings. But I also leave it up to you to maybe get creative and see if there's anything else in here that we can do that would help us lower the cost side. I recognize that the price side of this is a whole nother discussion that we can have, and that's not necessarily related. But our costs have gone up about 80%. And that's a pretty substantial cost increase that we're going to need to absorb. And I know labor has gone up, and I know fuel has gone up, so I'm expecting things to go up. Nothing's gone up 80%. So I think that we need to look at alternatives as to what we can save and how we can save on it.
Any other comments?
Cal,
Josh?
I don't understand these percentages, because if I divide 9 million into 4 million, that's an increase of 22.5%.
Just the residential rate went up. Everything else stayed the same. The commercial, the charge for the dumpsters, the charge for the pickup of the compactors, those all stay the same. The only thing that really went up, unless I'm missing something, is the base rate for residential service. And that went up from 15 to 26.
So Dr. Beckles, I'm going to point to the financial impact section. So about a 70% increase in residential cost, 22% increase for front-end service, that's the dumpsters, and no change to the cost for roll-off services. So when you add those all together, the blended increase is 21.9% overall.
Well, you went from 15 to 26, so that's an $11 over 15.
That's
Well,
73%.
well, actually, their charge to us was
73%?
73%.
But they're charging us $15.73, and we're charging customers $15.05.
No, I understand, let's not talk about the
Yeah.
cost, the
Yeah.
price, the cost.
Yeah.
So the cost was $15.73, the cost will be $26.73, so it's an $11 increase over 15.
Sure.
So I didn't do the math, I did the math on 14 because I had it wrong. On 14 it was 85%, 15 it might be 73%, is that what you do the math already?
If I redo my math, I can get that 69.9%. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is how is it that the total increase is 21.9%, but the parts are 69 and 22 and a half.
Because roll-off is a big component.
And why is
and
roll-off
so
not
is-
going up? They have
Well-
increased labor for drivers.
Yeah.
We can make roll-off go up, can't we?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
the price side.
Yeah,
that we-
yes.
Price side of it.
On the
Yes.
price side of it, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge for us is to decide, you know, how we pass the cost on. And if you increase the roll-off too much, we'll have more businesses come and say, we'd like to go out and negotiate trash pickup rather than have mandatory. But one of the reasons you have mandatory is so that you can control your residential costs.
Yeah, and the businesses can't vote except with their feet.
Yeah.
Well, but, yes.
Councilmember Hickson.
All right, so, I'm on, you had asked about going forward. We have a balance in this. That balance can either go to general fund to offset and return to the taxpayers, or we can return it to the customers here. I'm totally in favor of us smoothing the increase out, but eventually we have to get to this is where it's another profitable business.
Well, that's the thing, the smoothing has to recognize that you probably can't do that more than about 1 year, because we need to have a balance for unexpected cost increases, and, you know,
And I guess to Bruce's point, is there any way we can get this to 2 years?
smooth it to 2 years?
Yeah. And we can only
So-
do that through.
So I would-
cost.
So what I was trying to do is, let's focus, there's two things here, and they're really separate. One is what we charge, and one is what we pay. We're focusing on what we pay.
No, that's what, I agree with that, I understand that. We have to get to that number. Eventually, we have to get to that number plus.
Mhm.
So that's gonna be it. How do we smooth that over is we can lower our cost through doing what you mentioned and also lower our income, maybe through the same, like have a delta there that's not as
Or increase our
drastic.
income.
Yeah, we need to increase our income, but incrementally.
Yeah.
We may
Can
not
Paul
collect
run these
4.9
numbers?
million. If you
Right.
collected 4.5, you use 400,000 of your $900,000
Pretty quickly.
balance.
That's 2 years.
Well, that gets you 1 year.
And
So that-
this is a one-year
I mean,
contract.
what we don't know is, I mean, the unknown is, what's the best price we get a year from now?
Yeah.
And it's not gonna be a full year
We
from
know
now.
it's gonna go up, so we're gonna have to smooth it no matter what.
Well, it may or may not go up significantly, if Waste Management has given us a non-competitive price now. You know, the other thing to consider, and it may be something that is quickly off the table, but if you wanna manage your cost, at some point, seriously consider going to automated pickup. And, you know, the challenge with that is, I had a conversation earlier today, if you put something on top of your garbage can or beside it, it's not getting picked up, because there's an arm that reaches out, grabs the garbage can, dumps it, but that's a lower cost, and
Well, that's an educational thing.
that's
Well,
what.
no, it's more than that, because just this week, I was watching the trash man. He came and picked it up, he dumped it in, there's two guys on the truck, dumped it in, and a bunch of papers just, it was windy, blew out. And the trash man ran around and picked them all up and put them in the dump truck so he wasn't having trash all over the street. If it's a one guy on a truck,
Well, we could have staff do that. We could have a staff department that would cost a lot less. I mean, how often is that happening? We don't know.
Probably a lot.
On recycling maybe, but.
no, I think probably it happens more than you think. I think it probably happens nearly every street, once. And that's reducing the service tremendously. Having two people on that truck means we have very good service. And we don't get complaints because they put the barrel out backwards, and I don't pick up the barrels when they're backwards, you know, otherwise I have to get out of my truck and turn the barrel around. I mean, there is.
Well, they won't, and they won't.
Right, I've experienced the automated ones personally, and there's a number of things you have to sacrifice for that, so there is some service loss. To what degree it would impact our actual citizens, I can't say, but there is some service loss individually at that level. I think there's some other levers we can pull before we get to that point, in my opinion. Like, there's one up here, right now we have an exemption for those age 62 and older. I believe,
Is that means tested?
That's not on the cost side, though, that's on the.
yeah,
It would add in.
right, it would add revenue to offset this cost, right? And so as we start having these conversations with understanding the cost versus the price, we need to understand what that is. And I believe that number is what, 50,000 or more?
I think we're losing 85,000 this year. Under the new rate, it'll be 160,000.
It's $160,000 a year. I mean,
That's real money. That's
to
a
me,
lot.
that's a significant thing that we need to look at. And I think even if, I'd say we need to look at it. I'm not saying what an age number needs to be, or it needs to be income dependent, right? Because
I thought it was means tested. We brought that up to Rudolph dozens of times.
we did, and I do recall that. I don't think anything was actually implemented, so we need to re-look at that. But to me, that's one lever that we can pull to offset it, right? Because we're talking two different numbers that we gotta come to a meeting on. Another way, I think, a great example is the cost of the, it's called, I don't even know what it's called, like the leaf pickup and all that stuff. How frequent we do it, and if we manage that as an organization ourselves, because I see who they use, and we use that same contractor. So could we offset the cost by using that same contractor to just do this service?
Well, I
for
think
us?
that was the question is, do we get any better price? And the one thing I'd say is, if you like between now and when you bring this item back for approval, we can reach out both to Waste Management and ask them what they would reduce our charge by if we took that on, and reach out to their contractor, and if he isn't
Or any number of
if he isn't
contractors.
precluded from them, I don't know that they care to get out of that business. We could see whether, there's a net gain. But
Right, and I think also too, a frequency of that might be something that we can negotiate as well. I don't know how frequent it comes today, is that right on the perfect sweet spot, or could we have it less frequent? What's the cost breakdown between that, because that's labor, at least, in our community, we can go, all right, instead of once a week, it's gonna be once every other week. And does that have an impact of service versus an impact of frequency to our community?
I can add one other thing, is we're now doing every week recycling pickup. We used to do it every other week. And I can tell you, my recycling barrel is never full.
Except for after Christmas.
Start shopping at
Well,
Costco.
okay, maybe
just joking. I mean, I agree with you. What I'm saying is, except for after Christmas or certain,
Yeah.
4th of July, we had an event, we had a whole bunch of extra boxes. Mine's half empty too, half the time, if I'm following all the guidelines that it needs to be washed, it needs to be this, it needs to be
glass
that.
in it, you gotta,
If you're doing everything you're supposed to do, it's probably half empty for by and large the most, I would say half of our community would be an easy guess. Maybe we could do it every other week. So I would like to see that to help offset cost before I eliminate a service. Reducing the frequency of a service before I eliminate a service as such in here in terms of the bulk pickup fees.
I would say that I think we're overthinking this. I think that expenses are going up all over the place, and it's just the cost of doing business, it's just the cost of living. And so I think we're overthinking it. I think we gotta get rid of the 62 and over thing, and I think we ought to just move forward, because I don't think this is the end of it. I think, Chairman Bernanke came out today, or yesterday, and said that we could be seeing stagflation here. So I think we're overthinking this. I think we just run with it.
Well, so I would agree with you 100%. I would agree with you 100% that we're not going to see the end of it. So I guess my position would be try to mitigate as much as you can, because again, it's going to continue to come. So mitigate where you don't need, or you feel like there's some value you can gain. But you're right. I believe what you're hearing, that it's just going to keep increasing. So
I just don't think that getting Imagescapes to work directly for us is just taking that much money off the table. I'm just like, yeah, we can try.
15% of their contract.
Andrew, you had something.
I was gonna ask Josh, there's a lot of unknowns, and I think a lot of these discussions are gonna happen next year.
Yeah.
So I think I agree with you that we do what's in front of us and maybe minimize the cost to what's, I don't know if we jump to, do we jump to the full one, or do we go up 75%? That's what's in front of us now.
Right.
So you're saying move forward, full price,
Yeah.
just do it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I think we could save, on our cost side, I think we also need to follow what you're suggesting and use the surplus that we have in there, or part of it, to cushion the blow. But that's on the price side, and we can discuss that really at a separate time. And we should discuss it at a separate time. This is on the cost side. And right now, I don't know whether it's 70% or 60, whatever, I've got the percentages up there, but it's at least 70% here, and no costs of mine have gone up 70%. Cost of yours gone up 70%?
I would say that we have been undercharging for a long time. And
Undercharged?
right, we haven't been keeping with the market as far as what we're charging people
We're
for
in
garbage
business,
pickup.
we do this to eventually offset better service and eventually hopefully have a fund transfer, eventual fund transfer.
Yeah, I think the reason we're seeing 70% is because number one, Steve Edwards has been taking care of us and getting us a great contract, and we haven't been truly seeing the real cost of garbage. You know, a lot of communities, you gotta buy like garbage bags and throw them out, and it's awful, I can't imagine that.
Dilute those garbage bags.
Yeah, and I mean, we enjoy great service here, and people appreciate that. And
I'm not suggesting we reduce our service. I totally agree we have something we want to keep. I'm suggesting let's explore ways to have the same service and pay less for it. No, we're not gonna pay less than we are today.
I'm in favor of that for everything in life.
I wanna pay less than 70% more money for the same service.
I just think you get what you pay for, and, you know, whether we manage it or whether Waste Management manages it, it still costs, you know, and we are not in the business to do garbage for free. We have to make a profit, and it costs.
I'm not suggesting we do anything for free. I think that the suggestions here of eliminating the age thing is probably a sensible approach.
That's huge. I think that's
That's
huge.
on the cost, on the price side, but on the cost side also, I think we need to be responsible about how much we pay for contracts. Without reducing the amount of service, can we do any better on the cost side? That's my suggestion.
So what I would suggest is, and you've gotten into what we charge our customers, but it's important, and that's not the decision this month, but it's important that we don't get into the summer and then you have buyer's remorse that we should have had some of this discussion now. So I mean, I think it's healthy to be thinking about the issue, even though you don't have to make that decision.
Right,
for
I think it's a
couple of months,
we'll have it in the budget discussion, right?
but yes,
Okay.
but what I would suggest is we'll reach out to ImageScapes and ask them what they would charge us for the exact same service that they're delivering today. See if they'll give us a price. Reach out to Steve Edwards and ask him to tell us how much they would reduce this contract if we took ImageScapes out. And we'll compare the two and see if there's a net savings. And I think everything else that you've talked about is more for the future in terms of, do you want to maintain quality service, or do you want to cut back? And that's really a discussion for the next contract, but that might be something that comes out of your discussion of price this summer. Because we don't want to wait till next March to put an RFP on the street. If there's any consideration of changing how we deliver service, it's gonna take months for them to try to get new equipment if we change how we deliver service. But even if we don't change to an automated pickup, but we change to a different contractor, you know, Republic or Waste Pro still have to get the equipment, and they've been having a hard time getting.
The only other thing I would add, if you could, on my behalf, is just investigate the recycle pickup frequency.
Okay.
Just if it's a marginal cost difference, then maybe we say no. But if it's a significant cost difference, we
But
might
it's a
say.
whole truck and a whole crew for half the year. It seems like it would be something.
Why didn't we ever move that?
I think you get lower participation of recycling when you
Yeah, I
do
think
it
there was
every
some
other week.
confusing.
And I'm sure
Do you
Laura.
remember
could
why
put
we
us
did
in.
that?
Yeah, gosh, it's been a while. Yeah.
It didn't hurt that.
I think
what
No,
the
absolutely, I
difference
agree with
I
you.
think it had something to do
Find out.
with glass pickup.
is.
I mean, if
Can we
you're-
ask staff to find out when we made that decision?
Sure.
Cause there should be a recommendation in the backup of why we did it and when we did it.
That's smart to, you know, to
At
look
least-
at why
at
we
least
made the
that's data,
decision.
'cause
Yeah, I like that.
I don't remember why we did it. But I know I voted the right way.
At least we'll have
Well,
some information.
if it's clean, it ought to wait for the second week. Some people may
I think there's
not
confusion
wanna
about
wait
when
a
to
second
put it
week
out.
until they throw it in their trash, so they don't have to wait a second week, but 95 gallons is a pretty big recycling container. That's pretty much unheard of.
Cause we started with the little carts, the little small.
Right. Little blue cards.
The little blue carts,
Well,
and
the little-
the whole things, yeah, and then we
Yeah.
moved to we
Yeah,
increased
but
the
we also,
frequency.
we did do single stream then, we had them sorted
Yeah,
at the pickup.
probably.
Yeah, I don't know, I think what Councilman Hickson suggested would be good, plus seeing what the cost difference is to see if there's value there.
So we'll check on ImageScapes, we'll check on recycling frequency, and then we'll research when we decided to go to 1 time a week recycling. Is that?
Yeah.
And if there's
Thank
any,
you.
anything in the minutes as to why.
It was probably a really good reason. I know 3 of the 5 people who voted for it.
I don't remember which way I voted, but I know it was the right way.
Okay, anything else
Thank
on this issue? Looks like you're gonna bring those 3 things back.
Yeah, we'll plan to have that for you when you bring this back. It's actually 3 weeks that we have until our June meeting, right? Because of Memorial Day.
Dr. Beckles, have any questions?
No questions, I'm taking notes.
Thank you.
Item 4, budget contacts considerations. Paul, that's yours.
Boy, we're getting deep now.
Thank you. I've had no lessons in how to operate the technology, so I hope everything goes well. Alright, so the purpose of this, as Eric has mentioned at a couple of previous meetings, is just to sort of give you an overview of where funds are available and what they've been spent on, and what we might want to do moving toward the future on that. So this first slide just shows that what the original estimated revenue from these different SPLOST issues was, and then what the actual revenue collected from them was. So in 2009, you see that the original estimated amount of revenue from the SPLOST was over $9 million, but we actually only collected a little over $7 million. All that money, except for about $10,000, is spent now. The 2014 SPLOST was originally estimated at $7.8 million. And actually, I just had a conversation with the auditor at the end of last week, and we determined that the other 2 numbers on that row are both overstated by about $400,000. So the actual collected off the 2014 SPLOST was right at $7 million. There's $400,000 of other revenue that was included in that fund and then spent out. So the net is still the same as what this shows here. And then the most recent SPLOST that we're still collecting on now went the other direction. The estimated collections from it were a little over $15 million. As of this month, we've collected 14.9. That includes February collections. So once we include the March collections, we'll probably have already hit the estimated revenue from that, but still a year to go. So I feel like a reasonable projection of the final collections on that will be about $18 million. And then we'll get into this a little bit on further slides, but I've also tried to show on here roughly how much was either spent or already committed out of these different tax funds. All right, help me out, Monique. What am I aiming at? There we go.
Is this the right one?
All right, thank you.
Yes.
So over time, this is how much that we've collected since the beginning of the 2009 SPLOST. Just to give it a little bit of perspective, the 2009 SPLOST was 5 years, 2014 was 3 years, and then the current one is 6 years. And then over time, this is what that SPLOST money has been spent on as it was collected. So 2.6 million on admin facilities, about 7 million on rec facilities, 8 million on parking facilities, and then the largest amount is spent on transportation projects. Just to provide a little bit of context in general. And so you can see that the overall expenditures are somewhere in the $28 million range. Let's go back for a minute. Overall collections are about 33 million, and that's for these 3 SPLOST issues dating back to 2009. So, sorry, let me flip back here just for a minute. I mentioned the 2009 and 2014 SPLOST both came in under the projected revenue, whereas the current one is over. So what that means for spending is, if you have excess collections from a SPLOST, then you can allocate it to any of those buckets. And if you have reduced collections from a SPLOST, then obviously you reduce proportionally your spending where you can. So the blue bar on here shows the original projected revenue from the 2014 SPLOST. The red line on here is an adjusted budget based both on reducing it to match the actual collections, but also, for example, with the rec facilities, by the time the collections had started rolling in and we kind of knew how much we would have, then that money was already spent. So there was no opportunity to reduce the budget in that area. But it could be reduced some on admin facilities and on the transportation projects. So for the 2017 SPLOST, since we have extra revenue that will be collected from that, what I've done just as sort of a demonstration on this slide, we're committed to spending the $5.3 million on the parking project. That includes the library project, but also the interest on that since it was paid for out of the bond issue. So all of these figures include the debt service in these various categories. So you can see there's still $2.3 million unspent on rec facilities, and then essentially all the extra available funds I've put into the red column on the transportation category, because that seemed to be where we had the most unfunded projects or most potential projects coming up in the future. I'll get a little bit more into that. So these are the current projects that are on the capital fund. The capital project fund was allocated for some equipment for public works, some park projects, the library landscaping projects, which y'all will remember approving back at the April meeting, I think. Sod replacement at William Webb Park. There's a document digitization project that's underway right now. So those were all funded out of the capital fund as it was approved last summer. Then the facility upgrades, that's mainly to City Hall, and because of the earlier agenda item, we can reduce that number by around $80,000 because that includes the roof for City Hall, and then the design of Johnson Dean Park. I've marked on here what we're suggesting as a change from the original funding source. So you'll recall the library landscaping project was to be funded out of the operating budget from the contingency fund for mayor and council and a couple of other operating line items. Since it's a large one-time project, then my recommendation will be to move that to the capital fund. Whatever savings we can find from the operating fund would just mean an increased transfer from the operating to the capital budget at the end of the year. We're also recommending that since we had excess collections or excess budget room on the 2014 SPLOST, take the upgrades to administrative facilities and fund those out of the 2014 SPLOST money rather than out of the capital fund, which is less restricted. As Mr. Johnson's mentioned in a couple of previous meetings, you want to spend the most restricted and the oldest money first. So in this case, that sort of kills two birds with one stone. And then since we have recreation facility money available from the 2017 SPLOST, we'd recommend whatever further actions, including the design for the Johnson Dean Park, come from the 2017 SPLOST rather than from the capital fund. And these are further projects that we're more or less committed to at this point. We've already received LMATE grants for 2020, 2021, and 2022. Those include a 30% match from the city, so we have to come up with matching funds from there somewhere. Since we have transportation money available from the 2014 SPLOST, this slide suggests using that money as the match for the LMATE projects, and then further using the rest of the transportation money that's available from the 2014 SPLOST, some of the transportation money from 2017. We have the 80% grant from ARC. which covers the 8.8 million out of the projected $11 million cost for the Greenway. And then the rest of what's unspent out of the 2017 bond proceeds is about $1.3 million. And that's all dedicated toward that Greenway project. So you can see that those four funding sources add up to make sure that the Greenway project is fully funded if it comes in at the $11 million cost. So the implications for what happens to those different funds, right now we have about $1.7 million in fund balance in the 2014 SPLOST fund. So after spending what we've shown on previous slides, there'd be about $500,000 left in that fund, which would all be in the admin facilities bucket. For the 2017 SPLOST, incorporating the debt service, the park design, and the Greenway match that was shown on the previous slide, assuming the projections are reasonably accurate, we have something slightly under $5 million left in balance, and that would be split roughly evenly between rec facilities and transportation. And then for the capital fund, we started out with the $1 million that y'all voted to move to the capital fund toward the end of the last fiscal year. After including these amounts into it, then we're left with $606,000 that can still be spent on future projects. So you can consider that to be fund balance that will be carried through to the future years, assuming that these costs work out the same way.
Can you repeat that again? 606,000?
That's right.
Man.
So what I'm showing on the bottom line here is just, this is essentially what's left in the fund balance after tackling the current projects. And so if we, obviously the object is to eventually spend all that money on some capital project. So after those get to be named future projects, then you would use up that $600,000.
So I would have a question.
Well, can we let him finish? I don't want to throw his cadence off.
Well, okay, we'll have to go back to this one.
Yes, and he can go back. He can go back.
Well, we're almost done. So this is just sort of a list of other projects that we're less committed to, but are still sort of in the pipeline. I mean, we know that we're doing the stormwater pipe relining, which is largely funded with ARPA. The stormwater fund will contribute some to that. These other ARPA projects, the grants to nonprofits and the grants to small businesses, those are well underway, as is the CDBG project for the sidewalk trip hazards. Back from the 2014 SPLOST, we entered into an IGA with the county, where each entity would provide $1 million for right-of-way acquisition for this project at Buford and Jimmy Carter. There's another joint project with the county, Medlock Bridge Road and Holcomb Bridge Road. There are two parts to it. We've contributed some of, I think, about $200,000. We've contributed toward that project already, but under the terms of the IGA, we're committed to spend at least another $56,000 on that. And then the pedestrian crossings at the railroad tracks are something that's come up recently. So that's just sort of a guess number in there. And the reason I put on here 2014/17, again, we'd want to spend the older money first. So whichever ones of these expenses come in first, we would pay out of the 2014 SPLOST, and then the later ones out of 2017, assuming that you want to commit all that money to transportation projects. Just sort of for completeness, these are also projects that have already been approved and are underway. These are all funded out of the Red Speed Fund, so sort of tangential to the SPLOST and capital project fund discussion. And then this is just sort of a summary about trying to tie together all of the previous slides. So if everything worked out according to projection and the costs all came in right on budget, we would wind up with $600,000 in the capital project fund to spend on future projects. Out of the 2014 SPLOST, $500,000, which can only be spent on admin facilities. And then out of the 2017 SPLOST, like I've said before, it's roughly split between rec facilities and transportation, assuming that you want to put all of the extra collections or the extra available collections into the transportation bucket. But then then to balance against that, you have to consider that we're at least partially committed to $1.5 million in future projects, which you may want to come out of the 2017 SPLOST fund. So I guess what I'm saying is I wouldn't consider this whole $2.6 million of transportation as a check that you can write tomorrow, because you're probably going to want to save some of that to apply to those other projects that we're already committed to. All right, that's all. So I'll back up to
Okay,
wherever.
now you're also gonna reiterate this at the budget discussion, so this is not the last time you'll hear this.
That's correct. So, you know, if you're generally in agreement with this overall framework for
Right.
the capital plan, then we would refine it into an overall capital plan that would incorporate this, amend some of the funding sources from, for example, the capital project fund to SPLOST, and we'll present that as part of an overall capital plan for your approval.
Great. Okay, we had a question by Councilmember Myers first.
Yes, one of the future projects that I know we had talked about, kind of one of the discussions we talked about, and I may have missed it on looking at this, was the South Peach Street parking. It appears based on either the capital fund or the transportation for 2017 SPLOST that we may at least have enough money to design. I think we designed that in-house, right? I think Mr. Zaki had designed that in-house. We should be probably looking at doing that sooner rather than later. I don't want to wait until our budget discussion when we've already passed this and we're comfortable that we have the money for transportation there. And it's not a huge project, right? I don't see it being $1 million project or something.
No, and we'll be sending the diagram to the railroad to get their concurrence, but the mayor was here when Mr. Allen from Norfolk Southern was here. They just get to charge us more rent for the land, so we don't foresee a problem with that. But you're right, it shouldn't be much, and it could be considered I mean, the nice thing is it's parking, but it's also transportation, so we're gonna be able to take that out with our existing SPLOST money.
Yeah. So, to me, that's what this is an eye opener to, and I really appreciate it, Paul. This is a really good viewpoint for me to be able to see it and lay it out. So I'm well done there. I want to say that. And then from that perspective, Eric, if we could start getting quotes for that, because I know a lot of citizens have asked, hey, I thought you approved it, where you're at. I think we've asked a little bit about that. So at least that project, I might be forgetting another one, but at least that project we probably should get started on.
Well, the next one will be the pedestrian crossings, where we're gonna have to go back and redesign the project based on putting dual crossings at each location.
Okay, Bruce was next.
Just a informational, we have $1 million in our capital improvement fund, or capital fund. We're gonna spend it down to 600. Do we bring it back to $1 million? Is that the recommended practice, or do we just spend it down until it's gone and then reallocate a slug of money into it? And that's more of a, for you financial
I know what your
experts,
answer
not
is
for
here.
me.
Well, I hope I'm not speaking out of turn. My personal advice would be to, once you have a good amended operating budget in place, and we have to present that to you within the next couple of months, then that should give you a good idea, since we're most of the way through the fiscal year now, how much of a surplus we'll have at the end of the year. So my recommendation would be to use either that entire surplus amount or a portion of that surplus amount as sort of a plug number, and say whatever we wind up with as surplus in the operating budget is what we'll contribute to the capital fund, so that we can continue capital projects into next year.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much for saying. Yeah, thank you for recommending that, because it seems to me is that there's gonna come a time when we don't have a surplus, and we're gonna still have the requirements. And, you know, during a recession or whatever, we're gonna still need a bucket truck or whatever else. So I'd certainly like to try to keep that funded.
I want to piggyback on him, so not to interrupt you, but just to piggyback, so not to repeat the whole conversation. Do we want to set a minimum amount that we put in the capital fund each year? Is that a recommendation that we think we'll get during the budget? So we know there's a minimum amount we'll always have, and then if we have surplus, that goes in there too? is that a recommendation that we think you could review for our budget discussion?
Yeah, I'm still anxious about our balancing the operating budget, so I'd be concerned about making a commitment to capital before we know where we are with the operating budget.
It probably should be something we have as a high priority, is to
It's a great thing to
fund it.
aspire to.
Yeah, but you never know what the actual situation is. And tying yourself to a commitment well in advance seems like a
But
commitment.
particularly when we have some flexibility in using SPOS money and less flexibility in paying salaries, so.
Councilmember Hickson had a question.
Yeah, I've got two quick questions. I stepped out for a little while to get some water, I apologize. This is strictly capital through these funding sources. What do we anticipate fund balance to look like through all of this? And I think that's all unrestricted fund balance, except for we're gonna plug some of that into
So we had
the
10
retirement thing.
So we had 10.95, but $1 million of that is the $1 million that was supposed to have been moved before the end of last
Okay.
year. So we moved that this year, we're down to 9.95. We've talked about making $1 million front-end contribution to our OPEB trust, so that gets us to 8.95. What we need to look at is what's an appropriate fund balance, unrestricted fund balance to carry forward. There's some other commitments and restrictions that
I've
we
heard,
have.
in the 12 years I've been council, I've heard, and Rudolph was very conservative about this, but I'd like to know best practice, and this goes to what Matt said.
Yeah.
Either we have it in a capital fund, or we can even have it in fund balance and transfer to capital fund. But I'd like to know what some best practices are for both of those.
Well, for AAA bond ratings, it's 30%, basically. Something north of 30% of general fund.
Of general fund spending.
Of general fund.
Okay. So my second question was, can we verify the Jimmy Carter Beaufort Highway? I thought that project may have, the CID was running that project and then the county took it over. I don't know if it's going anywhere, and I don't know how long do IGAs typically last?
Up to 50 years.
Alright, so, but I don't,
Short.
I don't remember when.
Sometime after we're all dead.
But I don't remember when it happened. I don't know if it was before or after Peachtree Corners Incorporated. Probably after Peachtree.
It might have a
Corners.
sunset in it.
I would love for us to verify that.
So, based on my knowledge, final plans are supposedly submitted on the July 20.
So it is moving forward.
It is moving forward, yeah, it's being held up in right-of-way acquisition.
Okay, and the CID passed off planning of that then, okay.
And it's approved for construction in 2023. Yeah.
That's gonna be a miserable few weeks, or a few months. All right, that's all for my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Mayor.
Any additional questions, council?
Is there any recommendations for us to vote on for?
I don't think at this point, as Paul said, in the budget process, as we look at realigning how we pay for some things, we'll want to formalize that. So I will apologize to you. I've been waiting for the opportunity to see this level of detail, to be comfortable, and you know that it wasn't very long ago that I was still scaring you about my concern that some of the $11 million project for the Beaver Ruin Greenway might rely on some SPOS from the next SPOS. So, I think this is really good news that we can take that out. We don't have to have anyone concerned about our commitment to our $2.2 million match. We've got money available to do a lot of things you've been talking about recently, so appreciate Paul coming up to speed on that so quickly to be able to provide these numbers. And when I started digging into it, as soon as I got to the 2017 revenue bonds, which pledged the SPOS, that's where I got lost. So.
All right, so to follow up on Matt's question, could we task you, Monique, and the mayor, if this doesn't require us for decision, can we have a larger update section, and then have our policy items strictly be policy that we need to have action on?
Sure.
I mean, does that make sense?
It could be future meetings, you're
Pardon
talking
me?
about? For future meetings, you're talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Well,
six
in
of one,
fact,
half
this
dozen of
won't
the other.
This
but-
won't come back at your meeting in 3 weeks because there's no action to take.
Right.
This was a discussion.
So if Fred and load the
updates.
updates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can tell you
Nothing
that
against you, Paul.
Sorry.
we don't need to have this level of detail every month, but I'd like to see something like this at least quarterly, where we've got a good financial review of the city, and Paul, you did a great job. Thank you very much.
I like the dollars in the background. Go find some more.
This is what I have been hoping we were getting ourselves toward for the last 2.5 years, and I think you've knocked the ball out of the park, and I appreciate it very much.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
One last one.
One last.
As we talk about SPLOS, or the upcoming SPLOS, do we have a regular rhythm in terms of when we think we'll have, I don't know, maybe an update on that?
Well, I'm concerned that the county sounded early on like they were gonna really push this agenda and the timeframe, and then they've gone kind of silent on us, and the mayor and I have been in some meetings together, he's been in meetings without me, I've been in a meeting without him, but I left a message for Randy Meacham today, because I think, was it last week that we had,
You're
I
right.
can remember if we had
It was
tacos.
not
Strange
yet.
tacos, but we had a meeting of
Not
city
yet.
managers and mayors in Lawrenceville, and what became clear to me is that you adopt a resolution, and in that resolution, if you do the percentages to different programs, we've talked about transportation, admin facilities, and recreation. If we just put the percentages in, then if we have excess revenue like we have this time, the intergovernmental agreement, it's a legal document, so I point to you,
Right.
provides that once we hit the max, or the amount initially budgeted for each of those categories, as Paul showed you for 2017, the excess can be made available for anything. So we really need our resolution to not only show those percentages to the program areas, but a dollar amount that we assume is the total collection over 6 years, so that if the economy does well, and we exceed what is anticipated now, that you have the flexibility 6 years from now to spend that extra money how you choose. Now, that was an issue for the last 2 SPLOS, because we came in short. They were, there was a slower recovery from the Great Recession probably than anyone anticipated. The reason we're doing so well now is 2 things.
One, we raised the millage rate.
What?
We raised the millage rate 20%.
Oh, no, but in terms of
for
SPLOS,
okay.
it's because the Georgia General Assembly adopted internet taxation. So the Supreme Court ruled that the internet sales can be taxed. Georgia's one of not that many states that had the streamlined provisions in their tax code to take advantage of that. And then, unfortunately, the only positive you can say about COVID is everybody stopped buying services and started buying commodities, which are overwhelmingly taxable. So we've done really well, but as Paul was mentioning to me earlier today, it looks like we already hit the peak of sales tax revenue, and it's starting to come down. So some of that excess that came about because of people buying everything in the world online and having it delivered during the pandemic,
Helped a lot.
that's starting to back off, and that's why you see people are buying plane tickets and going on vacations.
Gotcha. Thank you. So.
But I'm
well, I
concerned,
guess I'm sorry.
I'm concerned that we don't yet have that hardcore number, and I think the issue is the county said, look, we're gonna keep our part based on population. We're gonna give the cities a share based on population, but they're not telling us how much goes to each city. They're leaving that to the cities to decide, but we still don't have a number. And my concern is at some point, we might be asking you on short notice to do a special call meeting to adopt a resolution to put that SPLOS number in so that we can give it to the county. And I'm just concerned that.
So you're suggesting that we adopt a resolution with percentages, not an
No,
actual.
I'm saying
number?
percentages and a dollar, so if we exceed
And a
that
dollar.
dollar
Okay,
amount.
okay.
Right now, they're saying 23 million, which compared to 18 is a huge increase over
Yeah.
6 years. That may not happen, but on the off chance that it does, I think you would want that flexibility of deciding how to spend that extra money, so. It's worth having the resolution have that dollar amount in it, not just the 3 percentages. I think you pretty much know the percentages, you can revisit them and fine tune them, and some of this may lead you to fine tune more.
So I'll ask maybe other questions to the mayor and you. Is this something we want to put on the June meeting? Because because we know, we've already discussed the percentages. We haven't.
Pat has a
We
resolution,
have,
I think, ready to go.
we have a total amount, an estimated total amount, we can pass the resolution considering that if the total amount equals the final, if our estimated amount equals the final amount, we don't have to do anything, you're ready to go. And if it changes, then we have to call a special call if it comes to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't hurt, I mean, just
Yeah.
giving us, be prepared for it, right?
Yeah.
Instead of having it last minute, so we can, so I guess I would ask in June if we could just have that.
3 weeks from now.
Yeah.
June.
And maybe
Okay.
we will have heard from the county before then.
Yeah.
Well, and I have tried to reach out to the county administrator, but he hasn't returned my email or my request for a meeting, so.
Might happen to know who's in charge there. She might be a classmate of mine.
I'll reach
Talk
out, yeah.
offline.
Anything else? Okay, Paul, thank you so much for the information, we certainly appreciate it. Okay, let's move to item 5, which is annexation discussion. Eric and I attended the IGA that's held by the Gwinnett Municipal Association. It was last week, and Tom Gill from the Georgia Municipal Association was there, and he spoke concerning some recent changes that from our state, representatives that are negatively impacting cities' opportunities for annexation. And he shared some things with us. So I guess the windows are starting to close relative to how cities can annex. One of the things that he talked about was the arbitration method has changed. The arbitration window has also changed too, to give counties more of a leeway in deciding what cities can and can't do. So one of the things I wanted us to kind of think about here was about the annexation and about getting an update on where we are and some continuing some discussion on it. And Eric has provided some very copious information, and I'm going to let you share that.
Mayor. So what we haven't done is to try to revisit that 57-page annexation report that was dated 2020, which still provides a lot of information about the organization, about the process. Talked about what I describe here as the large annexation area. What we've done is to basically use the methodology that was used in that report for revenues. We were able to get updated information from the county as of January tax digest for 2021. The 2022 data at this point is subject to appeals, so we can't really rely on that, and also didn't really want to poke the bear another time because we poked the county back in December when we asked for their crime statistics for the Chief, was that calls for service and the crime?
Yes.
It was all. So that's something that's new, and so what I asked each department to do was to look at the 2 different annexation areas and provide us information, basically a line item budget of what they would add to their current budget if they were to take on either of these annexations. And a lot of that hasn't changed much. Admin services would still require 2 positions for the larger one, but given the small one has a limited number of parcels and not a single residential parcel, all of the residents in the smaller annexation area would either live in the, I think is it Highland Ridge Apartments or the one extended stay. There's not really a big impact on that department of the smaller one. In the case of IT, they're driven by the fact that their biggest client is our police department. So if we're going to add a bunch of officers, then they need the ability to be able to real-time assist the officers. So there's a position added, and you'll see some variations in numbers. And part of that is that, unlike the last study, in addition to looking at 2 areas, we've looked at 2 different periods. An 8-month startup period that would start with the effective date of any annexation, which is January 1, 4 months into our fiscal year, whatever year that is. For example, if it started a year and a half from now, the annexation, it can't start 6 months from now, so if it starts the next January, the key is we have to have a budget amendment to an existing budget, and there's limited revenues that'll come in under either scenario because property taxes will have already been collected for the year. They won't be collected again until the next fiscal year, the first full fiscal year of operation. But also some of our other major revenues are collected on our behalf over the course of a year, but they'll have been collected on Gwinnett County's behalf over the course of the year leading up to December 31st. So we're not going to get a lot of insurance proceeds that have been collected, and we're not going to get franchise fees that have been collected because those will be remitted to Gwinnett County. So under either scenario, 3 of our largest revenues will come in during that first 8-month period. But unfortunately, not only do we need to staff up for those periods, the 8-month period, but if we're buying equipment, whether it's computers, whether it's vehicles, other equipment for law enforcement officers, all of that is a front-loaded cost. So you see the variation in budgets based not just on the people, but the fact that we may have some front-loaded equipment costs in that first 8-month period. The last annexation study talked about that, but it basically said that we would do a tax anticipation note. I would suggest that a tax anticipation note is to deal with the cash flow issue to get to a later period of time when you have your revenues come in. The only thing a tax anticipation note would do for us is we have additional interest expense and we have issuance costs. So I think our fund balance would basically absorb that front end startup period under either scenario. And in fact, it's very similar to what you did back in 2015 when you changed to a short fiscal year that was 8 months long, January to August. We didn't take in any property taxes during that 8-month year. They'd already been collected in the prior 2014 fiscal year. And so we had, I think, a $4 million drawdown of fund balance back in 2015, simply because of the fact that we had costs during that 8 months, but we didn't have some of our significant revenues accrued. The municipal court, again, looking at police officers, which I'll get to next. 1 position, if we're going to add patrol officers in the small annexation area, 2 if we do the large. The chief is here, but 9 positions total for the small annexation area versus 18 for the large. That does include code enforcement in the police department budget. But key, and I'll turn over to Bill, but when we got the data from the county, half of the crime in that large annexation area exists in the small annexation area. You've got Best Friend Park, you've got I guess the worst extended stay in the county, and then you have the one apartment complex. Chief, anything you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to point out that it's all based on call volume. Crime data is kind of dependent upon what kind of effect you may have there when you respond. So what the numbers of officers, the number of code enforcement is based on just raw numbers, using their calls for service numbers in comparison to what we have for our calls for service numbers and plugging it in. That's all that is.
So theoretically, I mean, just to understand you clarify, our service may be different level, so therefore we would potentially be reducing the number of calls for service because of the way we respond.
That would be the hope, yes. That would be the hope.
Now, with the police staffing for the large annexation area, it's more than the last study suggested we would start with, but fewer positions than that prior study suggested you'd phase 2. But you really can't wait to deliver services. So that's one difference is I think the last one tried to phase in staffing over time. What we asked department directors to do is to recognize on the day of annexation we can't have service delivery to existing city residents noticeably decline because we're trying to So, and that's why it's a 1 year. I think it gets a little speculative to try to talk about 5 years. But again, I think that last one was intended to try to slow that growth over time. But my concern would be, it's premature to say that we need to add, but we need to have enough people on day one so that it's not noticeable that service delivery has changed to everyone that's already here. Public Works, 2 people for the small area versus 4 for the larger area, because we have responsibilities for a variety of different types of maintenance items. Community development.
1 second.
Hubert, yes, sir.
You said Public Works it's a 50% up?
It's 2 people versus 4 people if you do the large, I'm looking at the last 2 columns on the schedule that shows.
Yeah, I was just thinking, can you walk me through a little quickly, like 2 people is 278,000 annualized.
With a whole bunch of equipment, because we're buying vehicles.
Okay, so the number of equipment stays the same.
Yeah.
Or it should be half the equipment.
No, the equipment goes up based on what you have, but the challenge is some of the, pickup trucks we tend to lease, but heavy equipment we buy outright. So I don't know that there's a significant difference between, I don't recall whether there's a significant difference in terms of heavy equipment, but if you look at Public Works, the phase-in period's 169,000 for 2 people, versus for the large one it's 310,000 for 4 people. So you probably got the same. It's been a little bit since I looked at the equipment list, but you probably got the same equipment in both scenarios. But the difference is you have 2 more people and 2 more leased pickup trucks for the larger annexation area.
Okay. No, the heavy equipment is, if it's the same amount of heavy equipment, it kind of
Yeah, I
makes
can go
sense.
back and I can follow up
It's
and
not
and
one-to-one.
get that. The community development, 2 positions versus 3 positions. We have an additional planning area to deal with, and our challenge right now is we're kind of at the limit of our capacity for staff today. So one of the issues you get with anytime you grow is that we grow in steps. So you try to get by with existing staff until you get to the point where you can't handle another customer, and then you have to add another staff member, and then you kind of level up for a while, and then you have to add another staff member. So one of our challenges in community development is simply we're overloaded today, so we have really no capacity to absorb. Economic development, not going to do an awful lot with the small area. There's a limited number of parcels, but obviously the larger area. I was looking today at the Amazon. Just the piece of the Amazon facility that's in Gwinnett County has a value of $11.8 million. They tore down what was there, built a new building. Part of it's in Gwinnett, part of it's in Doraville. But so the larger area has the greater potential for, significant redevelopment, simply because there's more buildings, and I don't think anyone would assume that that a couple of the facilities in the small annexation area are going to change at all. Best Friend Park isn't going to change, and I don't know that Eagle Rock is going to tear everything down and build something new. So you've got limited capacity for redevelopment, probably in a smaller area, more of it in the larger area. So ultimately, 15 positions to handle the small annexation, 31 for the large. They both have a deficit in the first year. The small annexation has a projected deficit beyond, so that would suggest that with what we're guessing now, and I use the word guess, but we have pretty concrete information what it costs to hire someone or what it costs to buy some equipment. We're using the same methodology as the prior study to estimate revenues. We don't really know revenues until they come in. They use the methodology that's appropriate, but that's the best methodology available. That doesn't mean that it's going to be accurate. We could take in more money, we could take in less. The 2020 study basically built in a 15% contingency to factor in the fact that there's a certain amount of unknowns, and it also assumed that we should set aside $1 million a year for capital. And at the time, they looked at the stormwater system within that annexation area, and they'd also looked at the roads. What I put in this report is just a suggestion that if we go forward and we're gonna look at doing either of these annexations, do what we did for the rest of the city. Have a pavement condition analysis of every segment of every road. That would be our responsibility, so that we have better information on the quality of the roads and what we might have to spend. And with stormwater, we didn't do a drive-by for the existing city and stormwater. We stuck a closed-circuit TV camera into both ends of every stormwater pipe in the city. And then we interpolated to say, what's the condition at the upstream end, what's the condition at the downstream end, and assume that it doesn't get any better or worse in between. As we're actually doing these relining projects, they pull the closed circuit TV camera through the entire pipe so that we don't start to reline a pipe that has some structural failure halfway through that we didn't anticipate. But at this point, you know, Mary Beth and I talked months ago about whether we should spend money to look at the annexation areas, and it just didn't seem appropriate until we get some policy direction to spend money looking at the infrastructure. But I think you'd want to get some, I was gonna say concrete information, but I guess that's a pun. You know, get a better sense of the condition of the infrastructure, so we know what what we're dealing with. I'll take a breath and answer any questions you have.
Well, Eric, thank you so much for that information, and Chief, appreciate yours too. Again, this is a continuation of our discussion from December. We had information to bring to council, and we certainly did. Of course, annexation it's an opportunity to grow the city, increase our tax digest, and also increase economic development opportunities, which this would. There's no expected action on this. This is to bring information to council only. And I think we're being very intentional in how we're presenting this information. I think that's important. Any questions, council?
I'll start with it. No, I would concur that let's being intentional about it, and how we're presenting it is going to be a significant portion of going one way or another, or any direction. You know, I've always, probably a little different than most, I'm very cautious, or very, let's say that, cautious. What I really wish I could do is just keep drawing the line until things make sense, right? Either financially and from what we know is happening in our county and our community, and what we think is the best for our city, our city to be. You know, what I'm not shocked of, but it's a great opportunity. If our highest crime rate is in the smaller area, it's a significant bite in that smaller area that's proposed. As far as the proposals that we have, they are what we have on the table. But I think there's some other opportunities to shift these maps around a little bit. And what I mean by that is not one or the other, right? We've got two options here, but we've got a whole entire subset of land to look at, and I don't know how to do that in a systematic way, because this is a lot of work for two areas, and you can't do that on unlimited numbers of areas, I don't think. But looking at different areas might be an opportunity as well, that we know that there's opportunity for growth in an area where a smaller map may not have and a large map does, but maybe a medium size would have both bangs for your buck. Or so I'm not really sure how we come to that conclusion, or come to that sense there. As far as the smaller map to the bigger map, you know what I mean? There's a huge delta in between. Sure. And I don't know how you close the gap on that delta and what that does financially to the business, or to the city. Also, some of those upfront costs are important. And then the last thing that I want to hit on, because you mentioned this, the community development piece, right? You're at a threshold or a step change. We've got a lot of step changes. But what I didn't see in this analysis, and we definitely didn't even have it for the first analysis, is the impact it would be for how a master plan would have on this, right? we've got a vision and a direction that we wanna accomplish based on what we voted on. I suspect if community development's close to their top end now, as we start to develop the Beaufort Highway Master Plan, they're gonna exceed that annexation or no annexation. So we'll need to be thinking about that. Maybe we could have done something like this similar with the Beaufort Highway Master Plan. Says, hey, you wanna realize this, it's a great vision, but this is the staff up we need to do if you realize what you are, because you're gonna add businesses, we're also gonna add residential. If we realize this plan, there's gonna be some cost impact to that, and that's already in our city, right? So understanding what that delta difference is, and maybe we hit some of these step changes we're already planning, and so they're less of an impact on a smaller area or a larger area. I don't know how to get to that, but that would be my question. How do I say Beaufort Highway is, how do I layer that on to both of these discussions and say, what's the delta difference, and then also, how long will it take us to realize Beaufort Highway Master Plan while doing annexation, right? Does it, I don't know the answer to those questions, but that's a key one to me, is to make sure that we don't lose focus on Beaufort Highway Master Plan and what we wanna do there, and have really a large focus on there. And if we can't focus there as well as the annexation areas, I'd wanna plan to how we do both, if I'm making sense, right? Okay, so that's be my only questions at a high level.
Yeah.
Just don't wanna lose wind on this Beaufort Highway Master Plan thing.
Sure.
Cause it's a huge portion.
Well, I think you're gonna see, I mean, we've got factors driving staffing issues already, and whether it's the calls for service we have today without anything happened in the Beaufort Highway Master Plan versus what will come out of some of those developments that occur along Beaufort Highway. There's two things that I just want to throw on the table. I don't know if I have them both. I think I had them both in here. One is simply, we'll have a space problem with any staffing change, so we have to have a plan between now and when we have the police department and municipal court move into a new public safety building, at which point we free up space here. We probably are gonna need some temporary spacing someplace, because we're out. I mean, okay, I'm looking to see who's in the room. I mean, we had to try to figure out how to create a lactation room in this building for an employee, and it's crazy how out of space we are today.
Yeah.
But space is something that, you know, I didn't wanna throw something in as a negative, but we just recognize that even in the budget process, anytime someone asks for a position, we've got today no place to put anyone. You know, we'll look at squeezing some more people in over at Lively, but in this building, we're out. We've turned closets into meeting space, or into office space. The other thing is simply that if we do an annexation, when you get to talking about the timing of, say, a referendum, and if you think about it, this is an election year, next year isn't. So we're gonna pay for an election to be held by Gwinnett County next year. If we do a vote next year, I would suggest doing it as early as you think it's appropriate, and that's your judgment call. But we're not gonna find 9 to 18 employees for the police department at the last minute, so we would have to consider hiring some positions before the annexation even takes effect, because, and Chief, I don't know if you wanna talk about that, but whether we're hiring experienced people that still need to have field training before they're allowed to be set loose with their own vehicle, or we're hiring people that have to go through the police academy.
Well, that's a good point. You've talked.
Be months earlier.
Right,
And so
regardless.
you want the vote to know the referendum is going forward, or that the annexation is going forward, so that we can start planning for buying equipment in this period when it's hard to get vehicles and hire.
Before you answer that, can you clarify, you said, so the vote is during, at a county level, or is the vote at the city level?
Well, it's at the city level, but it's held by the county. Those people don't live in the city. They're not coming to City Hall to vote for, I don't think, for an annexation. They're gonna go to their normal polling place to vote.
So, and
Right, that's true.
Right, okay, so, and we've clarified that the vote would be current citizens and future residents.
No, we haven't clarified that.
Right, so if it's only current residents, then.
Well, if it's current residents, then obviously they vote here. But the process that exists is the proposed new residents vote on it,
Right, that's,
right?
The
Not the existing city residents.
We're doing it.
Not the existing city residents, the existing residents of the unincorporated area would vote.
Do we know how many polling places we have to go? If they're going to their normal polling place,
Yeah.
and then we're 2 weeks
Do we-
early voting, let's get that's
Do
why
we-
I would make more
Do
sense.
we know how many polling places that might impact?
No, not
Yeah,
offhand.
we'd have to look at their precinct maps.
Because every one of those is doubling the cost. Well, scaling the cost.
There's probably one in the small map and maybe, I don't know how many in the larger map. Just the only reason the smaller map is only 900 people, so I hope they're not divided up into like 4
Well,
precincts.
it would be crazy if the apartment complex were in one and the extended stay is in another.
Well, I mean, that's
That is
entirely
possible.
possible.
That is
When I
possible.
when I lived in Pinnacle, I voted at summer hour, and I had to drive by a polling place.
Yeah.
I drive to Peachtree Corners.
I was gonna
Yeah,
say, we
I mean-
drive to Appreciate Corners in Hopewell's right there.
I mean,
Yeah,
it's,
it's in walking distance.
Yeah.
well, thank you for driving both of you.
I petitioned the county to change mine. I don't know what's gonna happen with that. But,
So that'd be some more data we can have.
Sure.
That would be, I think we should probably send that out over email just to kind of get some true cost of running an election, right?
yeah,
Well, the way the legislature's going, they change it every year, so.
yeah. Like I said, the windows have changed. We're already pigeonholed to the north, there as far as growth of the city. Hopefully, we're not gonna be pigeonholed to the south, but we'll see how that goes in the future. But Eric, thank you so much.
Yeah,
Chief,
well,
thank you all.
and to your point, Mayor, there's a potential that Doraville comes across the county line. I mean, I imagine that they like the Amazon facility since half of it's already in Doraville.
Amazon is huge. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that was our last item for discussion today. And appreciate your time and your patience.
Is this coming back in 3 weeks, or are we following up with information to you?
I think follow up with the information.
Okay, so the main thing is the polling place at this point.
And current cost we can estimate for running an election.
Yeah, polling
Total
place
election,
costs.
if we chose to let citizens, or if we chose to have the citizens, the city of North Ross, that should be fairly easy for us to get numbers on, but.
I think the only other ask I have is trying to find the delta between what Beaufort Highway Master Plan implementation. Cause there's, you go
Yeah.
from 15 to 31, but truly in my mind, we don't go from 15 to 31 in the small versus the large. We already gonna have to add a portion of that, a portion of those 15 or 31.
Well, that's probably additive. I mean, once
Do
we
we
go
add
through the
more?
budget process, will be in addition to the 15 or the 31, with maybe the exception of community development if we build a little bit of excess capacity and take a position off there.
Okay.
I mean, right now, we have not really figured out the implementation of, I mean, annexation is easy from a standpoint, it is 100% on January 1 and 0% the day before. Beaufort Highway Master Plan is, every one of us may have a slightly different perspective on how quickly that builds out. We're still waiting on the county to tell us how much capacity they have in those 2 sewer lines before we're done. And then we wait for 5 years for them to improve the pipe. We haven't lost track of that, but that would be helpful maybe to have, for you to have if you can give us a sense of your vision for the Beaufort Highway implementation, which is really the next step of how fast you think that might build out, because then that can give us an opportunity to look for every department in terms of what capacity we might need to be able to handle additional customers. Electric customers, trash customers, people pulling permits, people getting business licenses. Some of the infrastructure will change and we'll have different impacts of that.
There is one point just on the cost side of any annexation. You brought it up that there's a lot of equipment that has to be purchased, some of which is leased, which is not a single event, but anything that's purchased is a single event. You mentioned that it's difficult or maybe not even that worthwhile to look at year 2, but year 2 would have any capital cost potentially, if you've got equipment built in.
But that's why the equipment is in the 8-month year, so when we get to the 12-month
Oh,
period,
I see.
that should be stable, that should be representative of the future, other than
Okay, I understand.
at some point, we'll have the next cycle, but heavy equipment has a longer
Anything
replacement
that you
cycle.
purchase goes into that 1.8
Yeah, that's why it's
million.
important to see, you're gonna lose money the first year, but a business loses money the first year. They have all the startup costs too.
Mhm.
The question is, that second column in each example is to give you kind of a sustainable, and
Okay.
in the small one, it looks like we lose money forever. And it's based on revenue assumptions. The revenue assumptions are wrong, but the methodology that was used in 2020 is the methodology you use. It's the best that's available.
And that was what my comment was, it's like, you could shift that smaller map just by a few parcels and change that annualized number significantly. Just depends on how much you change your map on the smaller one, rather the larger one is edge to edge, so there is no, you can't get bigger than that, cause it's limited by.
You have to cross 85.
You have to cross 85, go into Peachy Corners or go into Doraville, but the smaller one has a lot of flexibility in terms of what you could do, on it, but I mean, it's an infinite amount of options we could pick. I don't know how we, yeah, that's what I was mentioning.
Okay,
It's just
I got it.
very
Yep.
difficult.
I didn't understand that.
Yeah, sorry.
And there, I got a question for William. I don't know if you have any insight, but I do understand that foreign investment in this area has increased, and several assemblages are being purchased and worked on now in this proposed annexation. What would you attribute that to? Is it for
In the, well, I would
for
attribute that
housing
to,
or?
well, I think I would attribute that to, remember what I called before chain reaction development, where you spur development for something like the Brunswick, and, you know, you're already seeing now along this general area in the corridor, you know, assemblages and, investment happening, you know, kind of under the radar, which will come to light soon, so I imagine a lot of that, you know, from a professional point of view, would, extend south on the Buford Highway corridor.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, council, any other questions before we move into exec? All right, thank you for your time. Motion to go into exec
So moved.
for, real estate
Real estate. Second.
and personnel and legal.
Second.
We have a motion by Councilmember Bear, seconded by, Councilmember Myers, to go into exec. Any objection to moving the question? Having heard none, all in favor, let it be known by raising your right hand, saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same sign. Motion passes. Okay, we'll take a quick 2-minute.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Beckles.
Welcome. Recording stopped.
Is she not gonna hang around?